Well, hello there, and today we'll be looking at the top 10 biggest tips for South America. If you found this video useful, feel free to drop a like and also subscribe if you want to keep up to date with the content. Other than that, let's jump straight into this. Most countries in South America have official coverage, but it is also important to be aware of the countries that do not have official coverage, and that includes Venezuela, Paraguay, Suriname, French Guinea, and Guyana. My second tip for South America is getting familiar with the common Google cars. All these Google cars that I'll be covering will be in Generation 3 coverage. So this will include the white Google cars, the black Google cars, the ghost stroke antenna Google cars. Be aware that there are Generation 4 Google cars that could have the same colour, but I'm excluding Generation 4 from this video, most because of the future updates and current countries that will continue to get more of it in the foreseeable future. In South America, you're always driving on the right hand side. When you have a white Google car, you can either be in Peru, Chile, or Bolivia. For a black Google car, you can either be in Argentina, Uruguay, or Peru. You may have noticed that I've said Peru twice, and yes, you can get both white cars in Peru and black cars in Peru. Whereas Bolivia, it is always white, and for Chile, when it is Generation 3, it is always white. Whereas Argentina, it's always black if it's Generation 3, and the same goes with Uruguay. You can also get ghost Google cars, and what I mean by ghost is that you don't see a very strong colour on the Google car, and you generally have this red marker in the middle. This is the South American stubby antenna. The Cambodian antenna will have 3 of these coils going across, but for South America you only have 1. When you get a black Google car with a stubby antenna, you should only be in Colombia. Be aware there is very rare circumstances where you can get it in Brazil. When you are in Ecuador, you will always have a stubby antenna. So when you don't have a stubby antenna, you can't be in Ecuador. And also the Ecuador's Google car or ghost car is always white or grey. It will never be dark or black. In Colombia, you can have all 3 of these types, so you can have it with an antenna, without an antenna, and you can get differences in colour. For Brazil, you can have a very similar thing, whereas the black Google car is just nowhere near as common as the one in Colombia. Mexico can also have this Google car with the stubby antenna and can also have it without an antenna. My next tip for South America is looking at road lines, and when you have a yellow straight line in the middle of the road with white dashes next to it, you can only be in Argentina or Uruguay. Apparently, you can sometimes get this in Brazil, but Brazil will normally have yellow dashes next to its middle road line. It's also good to be aware that Uruguay does not have Generation 4 at the moment, so when you get a Gen 4 camera, you should be in Argentina, but that might change as this video gets older. Talking about Uruguay, when you get the same pattern with the yellow line in the middle with the dash, but this time you have 2 yellow lines in between the dash. This is unique to Uruguay. You can get similar ones in Argentina, but the dashes are nowhere near as long as these ones. And for Brazil, you would get bumps or circles between the 2 double yellows, but you'll never get the long dashes. So this type of road line is unique to Uruguay when you're in South America. Generally, in most South American countries, you will have double yellow road lines. The only exception really is probably Chile, but you can get yellow road lines in Chile, which we'll cover very shortly. Here is an example of some Brazilian road lines, and generally Brazil will have all yellow road lines in the middle. Here's an example of the road lines being thicker, and also the dashes are also yellow. I'm not saying this is only found in Brazil, but when you've got like darkish reddish soil and you've got these type of road lines, there is a good chance you are in Brazil. Also, you can get yellow dashes in the middle of the roads, which you can find in pretty much all the countries. It's just really Chile, it's much rarer. White dashes are also very common, especially for Chile, but also you can get them in pretty much all the other South American countries. Chile, like 90% of the time, will have all white road lines, which is quite unusual. So when you get yellow road lines, there's a very low chance you're in Chile. And here is another example. And here is another example of the Chilean straight white line in the middle of the road. Here is another thing that's unique to Chile and South America. I don't think I've found double white road lines in the middle of the road in any other country besides Chile in South America. Okay, so now we're going to look at the exceptions for Chile. So here is an example of when you're in a mountain range in Chile, but they're using more of a yellowish hint of road line. And here is another example of a yellow road line in Chile, yet again in a mountain range. And here is an example of some new footage that's been taken in Chile that has really bright yellow road lines, and this is found east of Santiago. It won't surprise me that there'll be more findings like this in the near future. Here's another example of it being close towards the Argentina border, like the previous one. And as you can tell, it's got those really bright yellow road lines on the outside. You also have this like kind of segment shaped Google car, and you don't really get that kind of shape of a Google car visible in Bolivia or Peru. Here's another example of having bright yellow road lines, but this time you have dashes in the middle. And this is actually more south, and it's in a more green environment towards Temuco. And preferably, I don't want to specify where these are, just in the case that the Gen 4 takes over other Gen 3, and then that ends up not being reliable in the next month or so. So I'm just hinting that Chile can have yellow road lines as well. And here's another example, but this time you have the line with the dashes to the side. And here's an example of having double yellow in the middle in Chile. When you're in a very cold environment in South America and you see these road lines, you are in Chile on the Route 9, and it's like towards the Argentina border, so it's very good to be aware of this road, and it only covers it for a short given range. So when you get these road lines, you can really narrow it down whereabouts you are in Chile. You can also get them in dashes or lined with dashes in the middle, but it's the general colour. But then again, you kind of get that tundra kind of feel to this, and you'll also have the coastline very nearby. License plates can be very helpful to identify which country in South America you are in. And generally, when you get yellow license plates on most vehicles, you should be in Colombia. And also, it's a kind of a similar colour to New York plates. It's more of a darker yellow. Here is another example where you can get a yellow plate, but it is much brighter. And this is a unique plate you can get on some working vehicles in Peru. And as you can see, you've got one here, you've got one there, and you've got one a bit further back. Peru will normally have white license plates. Okay, so here are some Chile license plates. Most of the time, Chile will have white license plates, but the taxis can have different colours. So, for example, you've got more of like a yellowish colour on the taxis in Chile in this region, whereas in a different region, you can get more of like an orange or even pinkish colour on the taxi plates. Ecuador will have more of like a palish orange or a bright orange license plate on the commercial vehicles, so be aware of that as well. And Argentina is the only country that I know about that can have this black dot on the license plate. So when you've got this black dot on the license plate, you should be in Argentina. But be aware, there is new license plates coming out in Argentina, I believe, and I've seen some in Generation 4. So keep an eye out on that. And also, taxis will not necessarily have the black dot either. Okay, here's a little bonus one, but if you split between like a Bolivia, a Chile, a Peru, looking at the text color of the license plates can be very helpful to identify it is Bolivia. So in this instance, you've got blue text or a hint of blue, so there's a good chance you're in Bolivia. Here is that new license plate I was talking about that you can get in Argentina with the new coverage, but you can also get it in Brazil, as shown here, and also in Uruguay. But Uruguay hasn't had any Gen 4 yet, so you won't need to worry about that for now. My next tip is getting familiar with the distinctive utility poles in South America. And here is the example of one you'll get in Brazil, and as you can see, you've got like these segments going across, and this makes them look like it's a ladder, and this is why they are called ladder poles. So when you've got a ladder pole in South America, you should be in Brazil. Okay, so here is a utility pole you'll find in Chile, and it's very similar to the one in Brazil, but you do not have the segments or ladders going across. Be aware that I've seen very similar ones in Uruguay, so don't fully take this as a 100% guarantee. And also, I have seen a different type of utility pole in Chile with Generation 4 coverage that more resembles like a hole pole. So be aware of that very rare scenario. Here is another pole, and this is specific to Ecuador in South America. And the difference between this and Brazil is the actual bars going across are much closer together. So if we look at Brazil's, you can see there's a bigger gap between the bars, and if you go back to Ecuador, they're much closer together and resemble a waffle. And this is why they're called waffle poles, and this is quite unique to Ecuador. If you compare Ecuador poles to Colombia, Ecuador can have these poles as well, but they will never have this black and yellow markings on them. It's very important to keep that in mind. You won't always see these unique poles. There is always going to be some generic poles, but when you get these yellow and black markings on utility poles in South America, and it is not at the bottom, it's kind of partway up, you should only be in Colombia. Colombia can also have a little hint of octagonal poles. It's less common in comparison to Mexico, but it's something to be aware of. Here is an example of an Argentina pole, or it is found mostly in Argentina, but you can find it in rare scenarios in other countries. But generally, when you see this utility pole, you should only be in Argentina. Here is an example of a unique utility pole for Uruguay, and unlike Argentina, Uruguay will have this trident shape, so it's like you have this is the bar and that as a trident. So you've got this trident shaped pole, and Argentina should not have it. Or if it does, it is near the border. But generally when you see this, it's a very, very high chance you're in Uruguay. When you see pare on stop signs, you should only be either in South America or a couple Central America countries. So if you are split between Mexico and South America will always have pare. Mexico will always have alto. So if you see pare, you can't be in Mexico or Guatemala. Or Costa Rica in that fact. Also, it's good to look at the back of signs, and Colombia have this distinctive white cross. You will not get like a black background. Generally, it's a white background with the white cross. But when you see this white cross in South America, it is distinctive to Colombia. If you can't see the back, you can also see these bolts on the corners of the speed limit sign, and when you have these bolts, it is an indication that we've got these Colombia crosses on the back, because as you can see, you got a bolt there, a bolt there, a bolt there, and a bolt there. So that's a great way of confirming Colombia without even looking at the back of a sign. Brazil mostly will have black backed signs, especially on the main roads. Anomalies in other countries, so be aware of that and always make sure you use other clues. But Brazil will have this very typical charcoal black. Important to not be baited in some scenarios, but generally when you get a zebra pole in South America, you should only be in Peru. Generally, the zebra poles are not as skinny as this, they tend to be more thicker, especially towards the mountain ranges, so it's that general black and white pattern on the signpost. Another good tip is when you have like this cemented sign on this like kind of concrete or whatever it's called, or brick, that is quite unique to Peru. I haven't seen that often in other countries in South America, but I am less confident with that, so there might be anomalies, but generally when I've seen that, or whenever I've used it actually, it has worked. Another good way to separate Uruguay and Argentina is looking at the signpost, and when you get a thick white signpost on the back of signs, that is a good indication you should be in Uruguay, but near the border you can get them in Argentina as well. So although it is like very likely going to be Uruguay, it is not 100% given, so it's always good to check for other clues. Here is another example of looking at signposts, and this time we're using wood. And when you're struggling between like a Bolivia, a Peru, a Chile, Bolivia will heavily and mostly use wood as their signposts. So when you see wooden signposts in the mountain ranges and you split between those countries, it is very likely going to be Bolivia, since the other ones use it much less often. Here is another example of a unique signpost, and this is the one from Chile. And what makes this more unique is that this hollow gap just before the sign is here. I haven't seen that in other countries, but there could be border leaks in Bolivia or maybe Peru, but generally when I've seen this, you should only be in Chile. My next tip for South America is actually looking at road chevrons, because road chevrons can be very useful on those difficult rounds. So here we have a chevron with a white background with a red arrow. When you have this in South America, you should only be in Argentina. So if you're in a mountain range and you see these chevrons, then you should be in Argentina. You can also get rare instances in Argentina where you can actually get these blue and white chevrons, but the main one really is this chevron right here. And for Brazil, it is very similar to the Portuguese ones, but the main thing is you have the black background and the gold arrow. When you have this combination in South America, it can only be in Brazil. So when you see this, it is a guarantee you're in Brazil. You can also learn bollards in South America, but I'm only going to grab a couple examples just to make it not too overwhelming, and generally you can't really go wrong with these. So in Ecuador, you will have red and white bollards occasionally on the sides of the road. and they can vary in size, vary in shape, but the main pattern here is they'll have red and white. Colombia, you won't get any of these bollards, so if you split between Ecuador and Colombia and you see these skinny bollards that are red and white, you should be in Ecuador. Peru will have yellow tops with white at the bottom, so when you have these yellow reflectors on the bollards in South America, you should only be in Peru. And finally, language is essential, especially if you want to identify or rule out Brazil. So in this scenario, you've got Sao. So when you've got the Sao with the tail accent on the C, this accent over the A, you can only be in Brazil if you're in South America, because this is an indication of Portuguese. You will not get these accents in Spanish, so this is a good confirmation of Portuguese, and Brazil speak Portuguese, and in South America, it's only Brazil that speak Portuguese with official coverage. But yep, that is all. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope this series of each continent has been very useful for you guys. If you want to see more, smash that like button and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Yeah, cuss.